Hi, Taylor. We are here today talking about tiny home shipping. I am with Wind River Tiny Homes in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and Taylor is with One Call Logistics, which is a logistics company based out of Florida, but they do nationwide shipping. I think at this point, Taylor, you guys have taken probably dozens of our homes all across the country. So we're going to take a moment today and go through some questions about tiny home shipping. So thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about One Call?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Amelia. I appreciate it. I'm Taylor with One Call Logistics. We're a nationwide transport company. We specialize in tiny house transport all over the nation. We have a large carrier base and have networked and built strong relationships with tiny house builders all across the country, obviously including you guys. And really, I personally enjoy helping customers get their tiny homes delivered, and I really like the tiny house living and tiny house community. Um, I actually recently just purchased a tiny house for my mom to live in too. So it's always cool actually getting to do it yourself and actually having a delivery come to your property too. So I really enjoy everything tiny houses. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, we wanted to take the time to talk today because having a tiny home shipped is a really special process. And we want to talk about all of the things that go into it. It's more complicated than just a simple transaction. It's more complicated than just a simple scheduling. So we're going to start from the top here. What kinds of things should someone look for in a shipper?
Sure. So one of the first questions I would ask a shipper if you're shopping around doing some online research and is see have you ever moved a tiny house before, or has the driver that you guys have they ever moved a tiny home before? Um, Tiny homes aren't like RVs, like a lot of people may think they are, and they are totally different aerodynamics. So I think that's one of the most important questions to ask. Another question is, are they a broker, or are they a carrier, or are they both? I like to tell everybody about One Call. One Call is both a broker and a carrier. So we can do both sides, which I feel is extremely important to have both sides kind of there for you. And then basically another thing is just to ask the experience that they have in the industry that they're doing. Like I said, tiny homes are extremely different than most other categories shipping wise. That's one of the most important parts.
Yeah. One of the main things that we look for when we're vetting the logistics companies that we partner with is talking about the insurance, because it's really common for someone to have about, there's different levels of cargo insurance, and this would be
Right.
considered cargo when it's in transit. And it's really common for someone to just have a blanket insurance of $100,000.
Correct.
And with the state of the construction industry currently, it's actually getting pretty rare that we ship homes that are less than $100,000. So we're actually starting to look for certificates of insurance that have more like 250 just to cover replacement costs,
Sure.
just to really err on the safe side to make sure that someone's home is covered while it's in transport.
Yeah.
Um,
So that's extremely important as well. You're correct about the 100,000. Most carriers insurance starts at 100,000. One thing that we do too, which a lot of other carriers do, is while we're hauling any other units such as RVs, just like we do things like that, we'll keep it at 100,000. And then once we know we have an upcoming tiny house for you or another company, we increase it up to make sure it's covering that value of the house. Because like you said, we haven't been moving many tiny homes under that $100,000 mark. Most of the time they're closer to two. So having the right insurance is critical, especially when you're hauling an expensive tiny home that you just purchased. It's a big investment. You want to make sure it's covered throughout transport. Absolutely.
So what are some of the factors that come into play when you're quoting a route for a tiny home? What kinds of things can affect the cost for someone?
Yeah, so this list is ongoing. I would say there's so many things that come up to it. The first thing is the size of the tiny home. Is it a wide load, or is it a standard 8.5 foot wide tiny home? Is it tall? Is it over 14 feet tall? Where is it going? Is it going up into Maine, or is it going over into the Colorado mountains in February, full of snow up a steep mountain? There's so many things to look for when it comes down to planning getting a quote from for a tiny house. Whenever I'm quoting a tiny house, I always typically ask the value of the home, just because, like you said, a lot of the tiny homes are well over $200,000. And for us, obviously, when we're transporting a tiny home, having something of that value, it costs more to haul it, because if something does happen, it's obviously more expensive to cover. So most of the time we take all of those factors into consideration when sending out a quote. But basically, like I said, it's going to be the weather, the size. Another thing I always like to ask is who built the tiny home, because we have backyard builders, and there's nothing wrong with backyard builders. But if I see a tiny house that comes from like a company like yours versus a tiny home that may be built on an old trailer, the quotes are going to align differently.
Yeah.
So
what you say about, the location matters, the routes, when you are quoting for a destination, if it's oversized, you're going to have specific routes that you have to take, right? That the departments of transportation for each state give you. And so depending on someone's location, you might have to quote a route that's, going around long ways during a certain time of year, if roads are closed for the winter, or another thing with oversized transport being that if it's over 8.5 wide or it's over 13.5 tall, it's oversized, and those loads can only move during daylight hours. So it's very common for those transports to take longer, especially in the winter when the days are shorter, because of stuff like that. And that's something that someone who's not in the industry or isn't around it would know, that goes into play when they're shipping their tiny home.
Right, exactly. The permitting process and ensuring that you're on the right route, especially for wide loads. If you are moving a tiny house up into the mountains, it's a wide load. It may only seem like it's 1,200 miles and it should take a day, but excuse me. Typically with the route that actually, like you say, take a day or so, but it ends up taking 2 to 3 based off the route that the Department of Transportation provides to us. We have to abide by that route, because that's typically the route they designate that they consider the safest for the transport.
Right. Yep. And let me see here. Something that people ask all the time is the driver going to set my home up when they get here? And so we talk to our customers and sort of define what a professional driver does and where their duties end. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah. So basically, what we do, in every company is different. So we prepare the route for transport. So when you come to us, or the customer comes to us and they need a quote, we give them the quote, and that's going to be us planning the route for transport. And we typically will schedule or give a roundabout time for pickup, like a day for pickup, and then estimated date for arrival. I like to say estimated because obviously we know things come up. We can give prep expectations. So for a lot of builders, you guys already know how to prep your tiny houses because you guys have been doing it for a long time. But for other customers, they may not know. So we'll give like a prep checklist on how to ensure the tiny house is ready for transport. And then we communicate the overall timeline with the customer on how everything's going to go throughout the transport. And then obviously delivery date is so important. And that's where it comes down to expectations of how and where the customer wants the house placed. This is a big deal because a lot of customers have these locations that they want the house placed, which I totally understand. You want it put where you want it. But basically our duty is to get it to or in the safest spots that you want it, as close as possible. And then as far as the setup process, like I said, every transport company is different. We typically will put the house in the spot that you want it or as close as possible. And we will make sure if you have scissor jacks, typically the drivers will put those out for the client, but we don't do a full level service. A lot of customers want these units actually, jacked up in blocks on all 4 corners up at the tongue, and then even in the side components on each side in between the jacks, just to ensure it's leveled, which is no problem. But that's not something we include in the transport cost. That is actually like additional labor for the driver to do.
Right.
And typically that's something that we would charge extra for. We don't hook up any like plumbing or electrical lines or anything like that. That's more of a liability. And we recommend like an actual licensed and insured plumber, an electrician to do any of that if that's what's needed. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important for people to realize that they're professional drivers and that's what they're
right.
good at. And
Yeah.
they could probably, I mean, some of these guys are pretty handy and they could
Yeah.
probably do all of it. And sometimes they'll offer, but that's really not under their responsibilities. And if they're not moving, if they're not driving, then they're not making money. So
Right.
they're basically going to get the home to as close as they can to the spot that's desired. But tiny homes kind of go hand in hand with these remote locations
Yeah.
sometimes, in these mountainous roads with these crazy switchbacks. So sometimes, I mean, it's happened with our homes. I'm sure it'll keep happening. Sometimes it really requires bringing in some heavier machinery like a bobcat or a skid steer to get the tiny home in place, just depending on the land. And we've had customers be super cautious. I had a lady who asked me like maybe 10 times, oh, is my driveway graded appropriately? She lived really close to here actually. And it was just like ever so slight. I'm like, yes, you're totally fine. And then we'll have people who, it never crosses their mind that their route might be unnavigable, but it 100% is.
Yeah.
So if someone has a question about their route and if the tiny home can get there, what should they do in that situation?
Yeah, so I would recommend getting in touch with us or getting in touch with the company that they're thinking about going with for transport. Most of the time, if you're dealing with a licensed and insured or professional transport company to ship your house, they're going to be able to tell you if it can get to that location. And most of the time it can. Basically, you should be able to give them the address or coordinates. You know what I mean? If there's no address, we've had just coordinates sent to us and say, this is where we want it. We're like,
Mhm.
okay, we'll figure it out. But basically, we use technology just like everyone else. We use Google Maps and a couple of other different sites to kind of like zoom in and look at the navigation.
Mhm.
If it's really tough and it's like Google Maps isn't giving us much, it's not cleared out on there yet. We'll ask the customer to send us a video, like in a video of from like the roadway. If it's off a roadway up a mountain, we'll ask them to start from the roadway and go all the way up to the mountain or to the property and show
Mhm.
us exactly what the terrain looks like in the surroundings so we can get an idea of what it's going to take to get there. And that
Yeah.
usually helps out a lot.
Yeah.
Technology is your friends these days, and if you can use the camera to show us, like it really helps. I've even done FaceTimes with customers who who not necessarily we can't get these long videos to send. And I was like, just FaceTime me and let's actually show me what I can see so we can figure it out and get it there for you.
Yeah. And sometimes even if, they do all that and the route is fine and you guys have a plan, there can be some external factors that still impact that on shipping day, and that
Right.
being the weather. If it's been raining for 4 or 5 days and the ground is super soft, like even if it's a navigable route, now the ground is too soft for the home to really go through there, because we're talking about 15, 20, 25,000 pound tiny homes
Yeah.
dragging through the mud. So in cases like that, let us know what the conditions look like out there. Let's reschedule if we need to. Otherwise, they may not be able to get it there, and you might have some extra costs for some heavy machinery or
Yeah. Tow bills.
it's just good to be aware of all of those things. So we talked a little bit about, we've had customers in the past who have had to get some extra help to get their home to the place where they wanted. How often do you feel like that happens with tiny homes?
I would say about 15 to 20%. It's not like excessively like all the time happening, but we do get one-offs where we're like, we can't get it there. We apologize, we really can't get it there. And we'll recommend like, a crane to come in. And unfortunately it's expensive, but we'd rather recommend this crane that can physically lift it up from the bottom, with its whole frame and set it down into the spot, rather than trying to weave in and out of mountain passes and things like that where we just can't squeeze it in.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of different things that have came out, whether it be mountains or if it just be fences. Customers don't want to take like nice vinyl fences down. There's a lot of different things that come up. Maneuverability. A lot of people like to put these tiny homes too in backyards, and
Mhm.
they'll give us these instructions, which I said it's so important to get videos of what these look like, because they'll give me these instructions and show me, everything. And then when the driver gets there, that's why communication is so important. The driver gets there, they're like, but wait, so we have a septic tank right here, and we have this other tree right here, which, I couldn't see in the video. She never told me there was a septic tank right there. We can't run that
Mhm.
over. And I'm like, I have to communicate with the driver. Look, I didn't know that there was a septic tank there. Um, there's no way to get it there.
Yeah.
So then, it's unfortunate, but we have to put it somewhere where it's safe until they can figure out how to get it into the spot that they now want it without running over the septic tank,
Yeah.
skid steers,
Um,
whatever it may be.
yeah. I've been slowly compiling photos of, our customers who have to have extra machinery come in. Take some pictures of what that looks like and send it to me so I can show people what that looks like. What can people do to prepare for delivery on their end? A couple things that we tell our clients is, hey, it's a public service if you call and ask for the tree limbs to be trimmed on the roads leading up to your driveway. Most of the time they'll do that for free. I call here locally and have our trees trimmed on the state and county roads around here when we're shipping homes in the summer when limbs are growing a lot. I haven't
Sure.
done so in a few months because it's the winter right now. But getting the trees trimmed, and then we tell them to make sure their driveway is graded appropriately. What other things do you have another item or two to add that they could be proactive about?
So you kind of hit it, and you kind of hit it right on the head of the nail. Is basically the trees are the most important part, which is what we see most often. Those low-lying tree branches that you think are super small, that look like they're not going to do much, like just leaves, are normally not just leaves, and they can really scrape up the sides of the tiny homes pretty bad, and even put some dents in roofs if you're not careful. Another thing is if you're not using gravel, or for using gravel that's maybe been sitting for a while and it's rainy, like you said, soft sand is a huge thing,
Mhm.
especially here in Florida. We have a lot of tiny home communities, and like Acne Bell and things like that, where it's grass. And if it's raining, it becomes muddy. If it's super rainy, and you're in a grassy area, we should probably postpone it until the sun's shining and we can get through without creating a mud bath all over the back of the tiny house, because that's what happens when you start to
Yeah,
sink and you have, like I said, like you said, a 20,000-pound tiny house behind you, and
yeah,
then soft sand too. So you have that mud, and then you just have literally soft sand where the driver just sinks. It's not scraping mud all over the tiny house, but basically you're just sinking completely into the sand, which we have a lot of that here in Florida, and a lot of the parks that that you enter into do have like softer sand. It looks pretty, it really does, but it's not always fun when you're bringing in some heavy duty tiny house. So those are a few important things.
yeah. So we've talked a lot about the need for flexibility during the process and some timing, some things that impact the timing, some route considerations. Those are all really important. And sort of the culmination of all of that is that this is the reason why we caution our customers against scheduling any on-site contractors like your plumber or your electrician um, for, around a hard delivery date, because we do see those dates move relatively frequently enough for us to be like, hey, we don't want you to lose any money scheduling contractors.
Yeah.
Just wait until the home gets there and then take care of it. At most it's a couple, days, maybe a week or so before someone comes up and gets you hooked up. But I would, if it were me, I would rather do that than have to pay someone that I scheduled to come out and then the tiny home's not there. But most of the time things go off without a hitch and the home gets there on time. We just don't like to have people banking on that. Would you
Yeah.
agree?
Yeah, I try and give an estimated delivery window. We have a lot of customers. I get, you're super excited. You just bought this beautiful new tiny house and you want it delivered and you want to use it the day it gets there. Um, but we never know what's going to come up on the roads, and it's not to scare the customer at all or scare anyone, who's involved, but basically you never know what can come up, whether it run into, bad weather,
Mhm.
or a permit not coming through. If you have a wide tiny house, the permit may come through for the state of Tennessee with no problem, and then we're on our way up to the next state over, and it doesn't get approved and we can't travel. We have to stop at the state line. So those are, a couple of things that can happen right then and there, that the driver just basically has to stop, and it's going to postpone your delivery by at least a few hours, if not a day.
Yeah.
So ensuring, don't schedule contractors until the tiny house gets delivered. Like you said, if you pay a deposit for a contractor to come up and set up your plumbing, and then the tiny house is a day late, I recommend, like you said, just waiting until it gets there to ensure the tiny house is delivered. You really never know what's going to come up on the roadways.
Mhm.
And another big thing is people don't see is traffic, especially when you're going across the country and you're hitting traffic in every single state that you travel in. There's always 5 o'clock traffic and morning traffic for people going to work, and it may not seem like it's a lot, but when you're going through multiple states, it adds up, and it always adds time onto that running clock, for your expected delivery window. So
And there's certain roads that, like, during certain times of the day, because of heavy traffic, that they don't allow for oversized
yeah,
loads
travel.
during certain hours, so that impacts it as well. Another thing that I don't think people might maybe not think about is, like, we blow tires all the time, and that's just that's part of the industry, and it kind of has to do with, the likelihood of that happening increases with the distance, obviously, but also the number of axles. And if we're sending a quad axle home
Yeah.
from here in Tennessee to San Diego, we've done that, and we blew 2 tires along the way. And that's just sort of the nature of pulling in and out of these gas stations, and turning the truck and dragging those axles. It has nothing to do with the driver or even the integrity of the tires, but more just the nature of, okay, they're going in and out of gas stations all the time. They're probably going to blow a tire, and that's something to budget for, and something that can obviously cause delays. That's out of your
Yeah.
control. And
Right. We
then,
actually see that a lot.
yeah,
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 like a lot. And most customers, do ask, well, this is a brand new trailer, and
yeah,
why did it blow a tire? And it's like, well, that's a little bit difficult to, question to ask, but to answer. But basically, we could
yeah,
have, you can run over nails. You know what I mean? On the road, you're
yeah,
pulling into gas stations. There's all sorts of things that can come up, but we blow a lot of tires, a
yeah,
lot. And yeah, that's always something that the client should have in the back of their mind is, there are going to be tire blowouts, especially like you said, a quad axle, tiny home. It's heavy. It's going down the road for a long time, especially Tennessee to San Diego. They always have that chance, even short hauls, 150 miles. There's always that chance of a
mhm,
tire blowout, and it may seem like, oh, it's just a tire blowout. It's going to take, a couple, 20, 30 minutes to change.
right,
Usually that's not the case. It's usually
yeah,
it's a few hours at least on the side of the road trying to
yeah.
get the tire off, if the driver has to jack the home up and make sure it's on there properly. And there's a lot of moving parts that go into it, that's for sure.
Yeah. And the permits, like you had mentioned a little bit ago, that's also something that's out of your control. You can put in and request for your permits for an oversized transport. But sometimes those departments get really backed up, and it used to be that you could rely on them to turn those around really quickly in just a
Right.
matter of hours. And now it's just not like that anymore. So that's something to just have on your mind. It's not the shipper's fault, but it does happen.
It does, yeah. And I mean, most of the time it doesn't happen as far as expire, but
Mm,
permits can also expire too.
right.
So if like there's ever a delay, even just with like another unit before yours, and we're scheduled to pick up a tiny house, and we had already pre-ordered your permits, this isn't necessarily your fault, but then we have to put in a request to get new permits since those old permits may have expired.
Yeah.
So each state is totally different, and the permit for Florida may not be the same for Colorado or Maine or where Texas, wherever it may be. So there's always different moving parts that we kind of have to stay on top of to ensure things go relatively
Mhm.
smoothly.
Yeah. And just to clarify for people listening, the oversized permits, those only apply once again to loads that are wider than 8.5. or taller than 13.5. And that's per state. So you get one oversized permit per state that you're traveling through. There's a time range that they're good for. So you also have to line that up with the transport and make sure that, your permits are in place and not going to expire during that whole process. So,
Exactly. And if you choose a transport company, someone who specializes in doing this, they'll be able to make sure all your permits are in line and ordered ahead of time where you don't have to do anything like that. It's super simple. If you work with like a professional transport company and someone who's done it before, basically you don't do anything extra. You know what I mean? It's all handled for you. It's not as hard as it sounds to put in for the permits. It's just basically those getting actually approved and
right.
in hand.
Right.
So.
Yeah. This is great. I feel like this is all really helpful information for people to just understand all of the complexities that go into shipping a tiny home. But all of this said, I think we can agree that your number one concern and our number one concern is safety throughout the whole process. We've built this tiny home by hand for weeks, and now we want to send it to the customer. They're really excited to get their home, and we want that to be like a really memorable and happy moment. And it just requires a little bit of patience and flexibility, because we want you to have your home in pristine condition. And it's good to understand the things that go into it. So thank you so much for helping us through this. Can you think of anything we're missing or anything else we should cover that goes into shipping?
No, I think it's really important just to choose the right transport company and make do your research. I know you guys have a couple of different companies that you guys use, and I feel like uh, using referral, I feel like is always great. I feel like most people don't recommend companies that aren't great, so a referral is always good. Check their reviews, make sure you know who you're working with. And
Yeah,
I always tell you, just like I tell all of our customers, the cheapest quote always isn't always the best quote, as you know. I know that that's understanding from your customers too, because I know they're not purchasing the cheapest tiny home. They're choosing Wind River because of the quality of your tiny homes and like the way they're built. They're beautiful and modern and all different, you
yeah,
know, totally different. So, just really ensure, you're choosing the right company and someone who's going to treat your tiny house with care like it's their own.
yeah, yep.
So,
That's exactly what we look for, when we vet shippers. I have lengthy conversations in the beginning with people. I say, hey, listen, we value our customers more than anything. And
right.
this is the last point of contact for us. We've spent months fostering a relationship with someone and building this home to their specifications. And now the last part of the journey is to hand it off to a third-party logistics partner
Mhm.
for the transport, for the moment when the customer receives their home. And that's
Yeah.
very important to us. So yeah, we only work with a handful of logistics partners, and One Call has been on that list probably the longest, at least that
Right.
I can remember since I've been working here. But
Yeah, it's been quite a few years. Absolutely.
can you share with us a crazy delivery story? I'm sure you have a million, but is there one that sort of encapsulates everything we've talked about today?
Yeah, I have quite a few, honestly. I've had some really crazy deliveries. And it's nothing against any of the customers, just in case any of them see this or I might be talking about theirs. But um, yeah, I mean, we move for a lot of big tiny house builders, reputable tiny house builders, and we had this one that was coming out of the Pennsylvania area. A big, I think it was a triple axle. I don't think it was quite a quad axle, but it was going about 3,000 miles across the country to Washington State. But it was actually going to Orcas Island. So basically, you have to jump on a ferry out of Seattle, and you
Mhm.
take the ferry over to the islands. Customer super nice customer, but very very pushy about getting the tiny house there. Wasn't understanding that you're coming through I-80 through Wyoming and all of that those scary roads, and it wasn't in the best time of year. So
Yeah,
we were delayed, when it comes down to time frame. But we rather get it there late than kind of rush through any icy roads or anything like that. So by the time we get to Washington and we're getting ready to get onto the ferry, um, I don't remember what the Washington Ferry Administration said about something happened with the paperwork to get across to the ferry. So basically, when you're a commercial vehicle, you schedule your booking in advance. Well, just like anything, you never know when you're going to get there. So that's one reason we don't book anything in advance. We wait until we get there.
Yeah.
Something happened with the booking. The driver gets there and he's not able to get on the ferry. So we catch the ferry the next morning. Everything went smooth. The driver gets onto the ferry. He's and actually it's actually two drivers, team drivers. So they get across and they're getting to the final delivery destination. Super excited. The customer is so happy. But it's a new address and
Oh,
it's
no.
a new location on the island where we couldn't find anything on Google Maps, and just like I had talked about. So in the video that I had received, I did not know there was like this steep grade with gravel. And this is a heavy duty tiny house, just like we talked about. The driver has 4-wheel drive. It's a big heavy duty 350 dually, no issues. But the driver is basically going up this gravel road with a tiny house at like a slope incline like this. And it's just not making it. He's not making it at all. He's rolling backwards basically. Nothing went wrong, but he's rolling backwards. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not sure what we're gonna do. We're gonna have to call a tow company to help drag the truck and the trailer up to the top of this mountain. It went on for hours. I still have pictures of it. So the customer actually, this is being a new site, the customer actually had this huge excavator up at the top of the mountain for the construction company, I guess, that they had there, maybe building their house or whatever they were doing. So eventually they were able to get the operator of this excavator out, and they hooked up a huge chain to the excavator to the front of the truck, and they physically had to pull the entire truck and tiny house up to the top of the mountain to park this tiny house. It was the
Jeez.
craziest thing that the driver said he's ever had to do.
That's like the stuff of my nightmares. I think my one of my biggest fears is probably going backwards on a steep road. Like,
Oh
oh,
gosh.
I could not. And especially with a tiny home, a brand new tiny home. Like, what would have happened if the excavator wasn't up there already? What would you have been able to do at that point?
I'm thinking he would have had to back down the hill,
Oh my God.
and then maybe have like a large tow truck, like a big heavy duty wrecker, get up in front of it and then hopefully be able to drag it up.
Yeah.
But it was, yeah, it was quite crazy. I still have photos of it. They couldn't believe it. They could not believe
Unbelievable.
it. Yeah, that
Yeah.
was intense. But I mean, we have crazy stories. That's just one that stuck up off the top of my head that I was like, wow,
Yeah.
because I think it was
There's,
close to a year ago.
yeah, it's insane. I mean, obviously that's an outlier. So most people's situations are not going to be like that.
No.
But it's good to just sort of inform yourself about these things. And the more someone knows as the owner of a tiny home, what goes into transporting their home, the better. So this is meant to be a resource, not for our customers, but for anyone watching this. If you own a tiny home or looking to purchase one, this is really good information. You know, tiny homes are heavy. They're not like RVs, standard RVs, which are lightweight. These are wood frame construction, you know, very heavy, not meant to be moved frequently. So when you do move them, you want a professional doing it. It's very rare for us to have a customer who's moving their own home. And I don't think any of our customers have ever moved their own oversized home, because it also, you know, requires a CDL license and all of that stuff. But so we highly recommend, when you move your tiny home, hire a shipper who knows what they're doing. One Call knows what they're doing, and we definitely have used you guys so many times. And thank you for taking our homes all across the country.
Sure.
Yeah, and thank you for providing this resource for us
Yeah.
today.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me. And if you or any of your customers or anyone watching this has any questions about tiny house shipping or anything like that, feel free to reach out to us. We rather you ask as many questions as possible
Yes,
and get the details so we can help you out in the best way we can.
great. Thank you.
Have a great day.